All right, let's get started. Today we are talking about tiles. So you have a 2-week project, which is to make an architectural bas-relief tile or bas-relief tile. I've never actually confirmed how you say it, but I do believe you're supposed to say bas-relief. It's fancy. Bas is just French for low, and relief means you have raised and lowered surfaces. So it's basically like a sculpture. So if you've ever seen a wall that has carved images that you can feel and they are three-dimensionally sculpturally emerging from the surface, but it's flat on the back, that's a relief. We did this in Art 1. We made relief tiles. So now we're just going to do the same thing, but we're going to step it up a little bit, and we're going to make something that's really a beautiful product. So you're going to find an amazing building, and you're going to take part of that building. You don't have to use the whole thing. Like for instance, here is my building. This is the Duomo, or Dome, in Florence, Italy, and it's one of the greatest architectural achievements ever. Made during the Renaissance. Personal favorite. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this dome. I'm going to make a tile of it, and I'm not showing the whole building. I'm just kind of focusing on, there's still a lot of detail in this. So your job will be to pick out a building, something that is significant architecturally. Don't just like choose your house. Your house might be significant to you architecturally, and it may be an amazing house, but I want something a little bit bigger. It could be something local. It could be a church. A lot of churches have a little bit more architectural interest than the average building. It could be some historic buildings that you see in the area. It could be a modern building. It's just up to you what you like, but it should have some details. I want to see some surface details like shingles or patterns on the building. Another example is in the UC campus, University of Cincinnati campus. This is my alma mater here. This is the DAP building. Very modern, but you still have these like great like geometric lines and interesting shapes. So you could do something that's like this. It's very modern. So find a building and either make a drawing of your building, or you can print out a copy of the picture. If you want to use a printout, I am 100% fine with that. Use your resources, I say. If you don't have access to a printer, let me know. I can print it out for you. If you're working from home, I can even maybe pop it in the mail to you. It might take a day, but you can get it. But just let me know if you would like me to print out something for you. I'm happy to do so. So once you have your design, you're going to identify the background, the middle ground, which may not be much, and then the foreground. So if you have a building where you have something really close to you, that's going to be the foreground. This is all sort of in a similar space, so I have mostly foreground, and then the middle ground is essentially where the sky and the building meet. So in my case, I mostly have background and foreground. But if you have, for instance, a building like this, your foreground would be these big shapes here, and your middle ground would be like this stuff off here in the distance. It's a little smaller, it's further away from you, it's not up in the forefront of your view. So identify background, which is the sky, or maybe landscaping if there's some landscape, and then if there's any middle ground, and then what's your foreground. And if you wanted to, you could even color code it. I have some example pictures of students who actually color coded just by drawing around. So you could take a highlighter for your foreground, identify what is your foreground, just so you know, something like that, where you just are kind of separating them for your own interest. Anything that's foreground should be raised. Anything that's background, you might want to carve down. So you want the things that are further from you to be physically further from you by making them lower. And then you want the things that are closer to you to be physically closer to you by making them raised. So we are going to demonstrate space in this very physical manner. Okay, so here's how we're going to do it. First, if you have like a little container of water, add a couple of pieces of old clay, and then let that sit, and it'll turn into your slip. So you'll have that ready to go, or you can add some water to a slip jar if you already have one going. Your tile size can be whatever you would like. I would say to stay in the 6 to 8 inches range, or 5 to 8 inches range. This is, I think, about 5 by 8. So that's a good size. Too small, and you have a hard time getting into the tiny details. Too big, and you've got an overwhelmingly large tile that might break. So, if you want to make a 6 by 6 inch tile, that's fine. Figure out what size you want to do. figure out what part or what building you're going to do, if you want to do part of the building or you want to do the whole building. Have your printout ready, and then I'm going to roll out a flat slab of clay. A slab is a flat piece of clay. You want it to be as even as possible. Check like this to make sure that the side is even, and then try to keep it flat. So I'm like doing this, and every time my clay bends, this clay has something called clay memory. Clay memory means that it's going to remember this bend forever. So I could kind of try to counteract that by bending it the opposite way if I accidentally bend it. But keeping it as still as possible is your best bet. So try to keep your clay tile still. This is going to be my base. I'm going to just set it aside. And I'm going to show you how to make that slab of clay. Setting this aside. You're going to need your rolling pen. And then some kind of guide sticks. Now I have in the art room, I have like square dowel rods that we use. You could, if you're at home working on this, you might just use a couple books. Find a couple books that are, you know, no thicker than like a 1/4 inch. Think about like the width of like a pencil. That's a good thickness to be. So if you have a couple like paperbacks that are about the same size, you could use that. Or, you know, you could even use some piece of cardboard and make sure you have the same amount. And then the same amount over here. And then this creates a guide so that when you roll out your clay, it's not going to get any thinner than these stacks. And it'll try to keep it as even as possible because it's the same height on both sides. So standing, using your whole hands, you have your dowel rollers. And if you're a little more confident, you can actually just do this freehand. But you want to make sure you're always paying attention. You do not want any areas to be super thin or super thick. You want it to be as even as possible. Okay. I'm going to flip. Make sure you flip at least once so that compression is happening on all parts of your clay. Like so. You could even flip a couple of times. So you check on your width. Can actually just look at it from the side, but for your view, I'm trying to show you that looks like a pretty good width. But this is actually going to be my design that I'm going to cut out and put on top of my tile that I've already taken some time to cut out. So I have a tile cut out that's going to be my tile, and then I'm rolling out a flat slab of clay to create a design to add 3-dimensionally onto my tile. So I actually want this to be a little bit thinner so that I'm not doubling the thickness of this tile. If I have another slab here, it's going to be really thick. So I'm going to roll it a little bit thinner, trying to keep it as even as possible. You can use thinner books for this, or a couple rulers if you want to put rulers on either side for your guides, or if you want to just wing it like I'm doing here, you can do that too. Devil may care. I'm gonna flip it over, and okay. Now let's say you've finished. Here's another thing you're gonna do. Compression. So I mentioned compression with the rolling pin. Helps make sure that your clay is nice and solid. It's a little bit stronger. Compression compacts this so that it will hold its shape a little bit better. And it will help your clay resist warping or bending in the future, hopefully. So I'm gonna take one of my ribs, one of my homemade ribs here, and I'm gonna compress further by going over my whole surface. And I would do this on my tile too. Anytime you make a slab, do this, for even if you're just making a decoration. I'm gonna go a couple different directions, and this compresses this clay, and then I'm going to turn it over. Now your card leaves a little bit of a mark. If you have a rounded cut card, which I don't have right here. Here we go. So if you've cut your card a little more round, you can try this. Just make sure you're holding it at quite an angle. See how I'm kind of holding it like this angle? Hold it at an angle, and that might make a little bit less lines because you don't have those corners to contend with. So I'm going to compress by ribbing both sides. You want to do this in a few different directions. The more directions, the better. It just really helps your clay resist warping down the line, or resist changing the shape. And then you can just kind of smooth it out a little bit. If you have your sponge, wring it out so that it barely has any moisture. You don't want to add moisture, but you can use this to kind of smooth it out. All right, so now I need to cut out this image from this slab and then add it three-dimensionally to this slab, my actual tile. So here's how you're going to do that. You're going to create an image transfer by just tracing this image onto your slab. 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to try to hurry it up so that this isn't the longest video ever. But considering when I am in class and doing demonstrations, you know, it does take a little bit of time. But this is a 2-week project, so you have a lot of time. Watch the portions of the video that are helpful, and then you can pause and you can come back and revisit. I am going to put my design right on top of my slab of clay, and I'm going to use either my wooden tool or even a ballpoint pen. And a ballpoint pen is really good because it's got a sort of a rounded end to it. The point is a little bit rounded compared to a pencil. You don't want to use a sharp pencil. It'll tear right through the paper. And also you can see what you've done and what you haven't done because pen. So and make sure I've got the actual pen like out, so it's not retracted. I don't want to use this like open circle here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw over my design, and now I would take time with this. This is something that I would take, like, you know, this might take you 20 minutes. This might take you an hour, just depending on the level of detail. But the more detail you include, the better. If you want to freehand more of it, you can just do the main lines. But the more details that you press in, what I'm doing is I am pressing in a line where my pen is going. And I'm just literally drawing on top of this. It's a little difficult to see. So what I am doing is I am drawing just directly on top of my lines, like pressing it in like that. And I would go in and put in all of these little tiny details. And when I remove this, now I haven't added all my details, but for the sake of time, I'm going to pretend like I've gone over every single line and every single detail. And then when I pull this off, it's a little hard to see, but you can see the lines that are on my slab. There you go. There's a little bit of light. So I've transferred the lines to my tile. Okay. Just going to set that aside. Okay, and then now what I'm going to do, now my paper slipped a little bit, so my drawing is a little wonky because talking and demonstrating and working at the same time never really works. So I will redo this later on so that it actually works. You're going to take some kind of tool to cut this out, the outline of your piece. Take away the negative space and save this clay because clay is precious and we do not want to lose it. Make sure when you are done with your clay that you find your bag. It's right down here. Put it back in, press it into the clay so that so it's all kind of one big chunk. And make sure to tuck that bag underneath it. Okay? So now I have my three-dimensional tile. And this is how you get started. You're going to spend a lot of time just refining and adding. But first I'm going to take, I'm going to put it down on my tile so you can see what it looks like. I'm going to trace around this piece. And this is just the very beginning stages. This is just a sort of a rough outline of my architecture. I am now that I have my outline, I am going to take my scoring tool and I'm going to score where I want to add this. like so. I've got that whole area scored. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the back of my addition. Now let's say you have another piece that should go on top of this addition and be raised even further, like another step. You can continue to layer this. I would make sure that you're not getting more than an inch thick overall. Otherwise, what you would have to do, let's say you start building layers and you have some layers and they're starting to get out this level, you'd have to go in from behind and hollow that out, which you can do. And if you have any questions about that, please just let me know and I can demonstrate that for you in another video. Okay, I've got my scored area. I'm going to take my brush. Where's my brush? Here's one. Always one nearby. And I'm going to add a little slip. Actually, I'm going to use my new slip container. I'm just going to add slip. This clay is very plastic, so I'm just going to add slip to one layer. And maybe just a little bit around the outlines of my big tile. Don't add a ton of slip. A ton of slip is never really helpful. So now I'm going to take my slipped and scored piece and add my 3-dimensional, and this is just the beginning. This just is giving me a surface to work with. Now what I really want to do, and I may want this to dry just a little bit more before I start to do my refining, is I'm going to want to refine my surfaces. Get my board back. I'm going to want to refine my surfaces. I'm going to want to go in and find tools to carve my lines a little bit more deeply. I might find some tools to stamp in and create some really great, like, architecture is full of repetitive marks. So if you can look and find like lines or shingles or something where there's a really interesting repetition of marks, and you could find a way to make that happen by finding a tool and stamping it into the surface, that's going to go a long way to making your work look very detailed. Look at the examples that I put on the slideshow so you can see the level of detail I'm expecting. You can always go back in and add other details. Like, let's say I wanted to add another layer. I could take another layer and make this even more 3-dimensional. So here's my example. Like, I could add this layer here. So now I have like 3 steps. If I go any further, I probably want to hollow it out from behind a little bit. And make sure you're slipping and scoring with everything. So now it's decorating, slipping, scoring. Pay attention to how dry your clay is. When it is leather hard is a great time for decorating and making the marks in the surface, but not adding clay. So the first step is to make sure you have clay built up where you want it to be built up, because later on you can go in and you can use your loop tools. Let's see, do I have a loop tool handy? Most of my loop tools are over by my potter's wheel. But you can use like a little loop tool and carve down some things. You could carve in details such as clouds, things like that. But make sure you're adding a lot of detail. Make sure you're refining the surface. Make sure you're taking your time. This might be you do a little bit each day over the course of 2 weeks. And if you want to get started on your tile this week, by the end of the first week, you will need to turn in the picture you're using and a little bit of information. I will be posting an assignment for you to turn in an image of your sketch or image that you're using, and also to respond to some questions about what building you're using. In addition to that, you will have the actual tile to start working on. So you should probably get started working on the tile this week, and then next week you'll have time to refine and add details. Okay. All right. This is your virtual assignment. You have 2 weeks to work on it, research, plan, and get started by the end of this week. And then next week, refine, add details, add patterns, and make it look amazing. All right. Good luck. You can do it.